Hello and welcome everyone to English 391C, Remote Learning. So today we're going to talk about the position property in CSS. Let me start with showing you what I got. I have basic HTML page with head, body, title. I've got a header in it with the word position property, and then I've got 7 paragraphs with the word content in them. Then I've got it linked to a CSS file. In the CSS file I've got right here, you can see just some basic styling. So the header I've made green, I've given it a little bit of padding and a border. The paragraphs I have made them beige. I've given them a set height of 200 pixels, and then I've given it a border. And then each of the elements I've given a margin of 0. Interestingly, all of these elements have a default margin that I want to take away here. So the body has a default margin sort of all around the page, and I'll get rid of that. The P element has a default top margin, I believe. Yep. And that's to sort of represent visually the fact that it's a new paragraph with a new line. And then the header has like just this nice big wide margin by default. And I want to take it away. And this is kind of in line with the stuff we've been talking about in class before spring break. Like when you start playing around with websites, you start to see that, so when you start to build websites, you start to see that, why does it keep doing this? It's quite annoying. There we go. You start to see that a lot of building a website is learning what default properties each element has and learning how you can remove them when you need to. So here I've just removed all these margins, and that's all I've got. So today we're going to learn the position property. Each element starts with a default position of static. Static, or is also called normal document flow, is just the way that each HTML elements will sort of normally or naturally flow on a screen. So the first element here, I've got H1, and it comes first. And then after that, I've got my second paragraph, and then after that, my third paragraph. And they kind of stack on to each other one after another. And then each element is also has a default sort of width setting of 100% of the width of the screen. And the height is will expand as you add more content. So if I were to add more words in my header, the header would get larger. That's all that is called normal document flow. The position property allows us to change or sort of disrupt normal document flow in interesting ways. So the first one I want to show you is position fixed. So as soon as I do it, you'll notice right off the bat a few changes. So the header has been taken out of normal document flow. It's kind of hanging over the page, sort of ripped out of the document. And the content, the paragraph contents that was below it has now moved up to take the space that the header was once in. That's the first thing. The second thing is that the header is no longer 100% of the width of the page. So it's now just shrunk to be as short as possible based off the content that it has. So what the position fixed property allows us to do, and I'll just demonstrate it, is you get access to these 4 other properties: top, bottom, left, and right, that you can use to position the element. So let's just start with bottom. So what it does is here I've told the header element to be 0 pixels away from the bottom of the screen. And so it's 0 pixels away from the bottom of the screen. And then I can tell it to be, say, 0 pixels away from the right of this side of the screen. So now it's stuck in the bottom right corner. And what the fixed value will do with position is it'll sort of fix it to your browser no matter where you scroll on the page. So I could be at the top of the page, I could be at the bottom of the page, and it'll still be there. This is really useful for if there's some kind of content, a logo, maybe just a header, maybe even a nav bar that you want to be stuck on the screen. The fix property allows you to do it. And then you can use the bottom, right, left, and top properties to put it where you want. So just to demonstrate, I can do the same thing with top and right, or bottom and left. And if I wanted there to be a gap between the edge of the screen and the element, then I would, instead of 0 pixels, I would add, say, 30 pixels. And then no matter where I scroll, it's always going to be sort of suspended somewhere on the screen. Okay, so that's position fixed. The second one is very similar. This is position sticky. And it's similar in that it's meant to stick to the screen. But you'll notice that there's a difference. So when I set position sticky, the header element is still within normal document flow, which means that it is still inside the the usual sort of way that elements work, where the content elements are sort of respecting the height and the space that the header element has, and the header element is 100% of the width of the page. But now I can use my, say, top, left, bottom, right elements to stick the, let's just do top, just to show you. To stick this element to the top of the screen anytime that I scroll. So here you can see I scroll, and the element stays. So this is really useful for when you want to have something like a nav bar that it's at the top of the screen and it works normally when there are users at the top of the screen. But then as you scroll down, the rest of the content kind of flies by and the nav bar sticks around. So sticky position is very useful, but I would say don't go overboard with it, because I have seen, people have stuck to the top of the screen these ridiculously large elements, and some of your users might have a small laptop or even a mobile device that they're using to visit your website, and these elements will take up a disproportionately large amount of the screen size when you have them stuck, and they'll reduce the kind of effective screen size that they can see on the screen. So be careful with these. Okay, so that's fixed, that's sticky. Now I just want to show you position relative. So position relative, again, does not rip the element out of normal document flow. It's still being respected. It still comes first. It still has 100% of its width. But now I can use the top left, bottom right properties to kind of nudge it in a certain direction. So I can say, well, I want this to be 16 pixels away from the top of the screen, and we'll say 50 pixels away from the left side of the screen. And so there are two things to note here. So unlike fixed and sticky, when it's position relative, it will not follow you as you scroll down the screen, but it will still, you are still able to position it with these properties. And then the second thing is that as you sort of nudge it around, the other elements on the page don't move. They do not come in to fill in the spot. It's just kind of a blank spot. So we've used the position relative property, if you recall, way back in exercise 7, which I've got right here. And I'll zoom in. We use position property to kind of take our buttons for our web projects or routing samples and to kind of set them, it's kind of hard to see on the screen, but kind of set them offset and to sort of nudge them out of normal document flow, make them a little more asymmetrical. and I think it looks nice. So that's position relative. And then the last one I want to show you is position absolute. So position absolute, first thing you'll notice, the element has been taken out of normal document flow. So all the other elements have snuck up to fill in the spot that it was once in. And the width is no longer 100% of the screen. So what position absolute does is, again, it lets us access the top, left, button, bottom, and right properties with an extra bonus. So let's just show you. I can do the usual 16 pixels, and then right maybe 0 pixels. When it's set to position absolute, I can move this property around the screen, and it doesn't leave this sort of ugly space or blank space where the property originally was. So that's one benefit of position absolute. The second benefit is what I can do is, instead of pixel values, I can use percentages. So I'll do top 40%. This is kind of a unique behavior. So what's going on here? It is 40% away from the top of the screen. So if you can imagine, from the top of the screen to the bottom of the screen, that is 100%. So that's our what's called a viewport height in technical terms. And what I've done here is I've taken my viewport height and I've said, I want my element to start 40% of that height away from the top. And so that's what it does. And this is kind of different from how percentages work in other elements. So like when we set height and weights, oftentimes that'll be relative to its parent container. So you see the parent of the header is the body. But it does not go 40% away from the top of the body, which is quite long. It's 40% away from the top of your screen. And it doesn't matter what size screen you have. It could be a mobile device. It could be a large computer like I have here. I'm just kind of zoomed in, so that's easier to see. But you see it's always 40% away from the top of the screen. And then same with left, right, and bottom. I can do, say, 50% away from the left side of the screen. And you'll note that even though it's 50% of the screen, so it's half the screen, right? It doesn't kind of visually appear that way. What's going on is the leftmost side of the element is 50% away from the left side of the screen. So, and then the rest of the elements kind of flows to the right. So it does not appear to be like you might intuitively think that this would center the element. It does not. It just sort of starts it 50% away. So if you did want to use the position absolute property to sort of give the appearance of centering, you would have to sort of fiddle with it, like maybe set 35%. But of course, the problem here is that if you get a bigger monitor, let me zoom out again, it loses its sort of centeriness. So I would personally not use the position absolute property with the intention of centering something. I would use other tools like margin auto or some of the grid tools to do that. But what position absolute does allow you to do is you can sort of zoom in again. You can sort of approximate roughly where something will be. So like, let's say I wanted this to be, let's say, somewhere loosely a little bit away from the right side of the screen and a good chunk away from the top. I could use position absolute to put my element there. So those are the 4 settings. We have fixed, sticky, relative, and absolute. And then I just kind of want to show you a sort of combination. You can actually combine position, relative, and absolute to do something kind of interesting. So to demonstrate this, I'm going to go back to my HTML. And I'm going to add a parent element section. that I put my header in. So then I'm going to go over here to my section, or my CSS, and I'm going to give the section position relative. So, oh, then I just to demonstrate this, I'll also give it a nice height. And why not just give it a background color? Okay, so let me show you how this works. When you have an element that is set to position absolute, and it is inside another element, the section element, that is set to position relative, then any of the sort of top left, bottom right instructions we give are going to be relative to the parent. So that's kind of a complicated explanation. Let me just show you. So I can do top 40%. And now instead of it being 40% away of the entire screen height away from the top, it'll be 40% of the section element. So whatever 40% of this height is, it is that far away from the top of the element. And I could do, left, right should work pretty similarly. I can do 30% away. Or I could do, just to demonstrate this even more, let's say 90%. So the element, if we didn't have this parent element and we had position absolute, then the header element would appear kind of down here, 90% away from the top of the screen. And it would be relative to the whole screen size. But because we set a parent element and we gave it position relative, then it is now 90% away from the top of this element right here, the section element. And it does actually overflow past it a little bit. So it's kind of a confusing combination to a lot of people when they first see it. But in practice, I think this is often how position absolute is used. Usually you will not necessarily have an element that you will want to position, on a certain spot on a whole page. Rather, you'll have an element that is inside another element, and you'll want to position it within that element, to be sort of a little more precise about it. Okay, and if you have questions about that, go ahead and just let me know in an email. I can explain it further. But those are the 4 properties. And the last thing I want to touch on is, when do we use all of these properties? So we have now a lot of choices for what to do when we want to break normal document flow. We have floats, we have grid, and we have now the position property. In general, I would say if you are looking to have a sort of to organize the general layout of a page, then you should use a layout system like grid. Like if you have your resume page or your writing samples or writing projects or projects page of your portfolio website, and you want to lay it out, you've got a number of elements to move around, you should be using grid for that. If you want to take an image and shove it to the left or the right and have text wrap around where it used to be, then that's what float is for. If you have an element that you want to stick to the screen, then you should be using position fixed or position sticky. And then if you have an element, or maybe like a set of elements that you kind of like where they're positioned, but you want to nudge them a little bit in one direction, especially with, in a way that padding and margin wouldn't allow you to do. Like if you want to sort of overlap elements very slightly or give them a little asymmetry, then use position relative and just like add a few pixels to top or left. And then finally, I would say position absolute for me is a kind of wild card. It's like the last tool in the toolkit and kind of a niche tool that is often used when other tools don't work, or it's used for very specific kinds of things. So let's say you have just one element and you want to kind of get position it on a very specific spot of the page, then you might use position absolute to do so. Or honestly, when you are trying to do something a little weird, and or like something advanced that we haven't learned in class, and you're looking up how to do it, and it has to do with layout or positioning, oftentimes you will find help that directs you to the position absolute property and uses it in some way to solve a problem. So, like for example, I've got a shout out to Corinne in my section, who figured out all on her own that you can use the position absolute property to take a MP4 file or video and then have it in the background while just sort of while other text is overlapped on top of it. So again, the position absolute property is kind of a wild card position element that you'll often see when you look for help with certain code problems. Okay, so that's the position property. Yeah, hopefully this will be the first of many videos to come. And then to end the video, the YouTube gods have instructed me, I'm supposed to say, to go ahead and smash that like button. And that's it.